Hi, and welcome to another episode of Hot Takes with me, the Silver Fox. You will have noticed over the last few weeks I've done a lot of stories about the Greater Glasgow and Clyde Health Authority or the Queen Elizabeth University Hospital, things like that. And then, of course, we had the Freeman letter. If ever there was a story that needs to come out there, it was that, and we have that. That was released into the public domain by this channel, and we drew conclusions which were not good about the goings on of what was happening at the time. Then yesterday we looked at the fact that the hospital was taken out of special measures. Who took it out? Why was that the case? All these sort of things. Now these have all come from my source, Merlin. We've mentioned Merlin quite a few times, and Merlin has been very forthcoming and given some nice little drip feeds, we'll call them, little morsels to whet the appetite of what is to come. And so we are going to have a series of interviews over the next sort of few days, months, weeks. Doing that out of order, but days, weeks, and months. Hopefully not months. Let's hopefully just days and weeks with Merlin. And Merlin's going to talk about things. Merlin's going to bring friends on. We're going to have conversations with people at the heart of the issue over time. And so what we've got here is the first interview. Now, Merlin doesn't want to be interviewed on screen, as in facially. It's a phone call. It's an edited phone call that we're going to put there. It's absolutely fine. Now, you will see a picture of Merlin. We're putting up a newspaper clipping, so and Merlin will give her name for Merlin as a she. And you may recognise Merlin if you've been following these stories. The reason is Merlin just isn't comfortable, I think, talking live on screen, and that's absolutely fine. Some people just find that a difficult prospect. But she's more than happy to speak as a one-to-one with me, as though it were a phone call, and she's quite happy for everything that we're going to talk about today to go out and be publicised, and that's where we're at. Now, I will say, because Merlin's asked me to do a little bit of promotion, and that is that she has a Facebook page, and I'm happy to do this. And again, I will pin a link down below in the pinned comments. But she is Scotland's ex-registered nurse. That's X, just the letter X, not EX. So it's Scotland's ex-registered nurse. And if you go in and do a search on Facebook, you'll see her there. Now, we're going to start this video. Now, because of its length, I have cut this video into two parts, part one, part two, just to make it more manageable in terms of watching. So I will release them both at the same time, but obviously watch part one first before you watch part two. Otherwise, you won't get the thread of what's going on. But without further ado, I'm going to come in now, and we'll cut in. Well, remembering it is a Zoom call, and I've put a note up to the effect that, as you'll see, the picture quality is slightly less and the sound quality is slightly less because obviously, being a Zoom call, you don't have top quality sound recording equipment and things like that. And also because it's Zoom, even though I've got a very good camera, it has to go sort of back through the Zoom system, which can't quite handle it. So it's not unwatchable. It's just very slightly grainier picture. But it's not really what you're seeing that's important. It's what you're hearing. And it's about time you got down and heard it. So we're going to cut straight in and go to this video now. Right, so as you all know, we've had this information released from my source. We've been calling Merlin, but now my source is here. She wants to do this interview voice only, which I can understand, but she is willing to introduce herself, and so I'm going to hand over now to my source and my new best friend, and it's take it away, please go ahead.
Hello, my name is Leslie Roberts. Prior to COVID, I had been a registered nurse after training in the very late 80s. I had almost 30 years experience of being on site. I was also the ward's infection control link nurse, fully qualified, and I was also externally qualified through a diploma. However, in 2016, due to the level of bullying, intimidation, targeting within the health board, I decided to become a union rep for Unite the Union. I then trained as a general workplace for the local area, and then I went and done further training for equality and diversity and health and safety. And as you well know, health and safety is accredited to the law. So technically you had standing to speak to the health and safety executive, and other issues like other organisations like that, to help you do the role in a way which was in line with the Health and Safety at Work Act in 1974.
So we can say that you are both experienced and qualified, and so anything that comes up within this is you're speaking as someone who is knowledgeable,
Yeah,
experienced, someone whose word is entirely trustworthy and believable due to the many years' experience and the various qualifications, courses, etc., that you've taken.
yeah.
So that's excellent. That's excellent. So, what was going on prior to the COVID epidemic? Sort of a general view.
It GGC, NHS GGC was the most horrific employer to work for.
This is
I
the Greater Glasgow and Clyde Board,
Yes,
isn't it?
yes, sorry, I
Yeah,
should have
yeah.
said that.
No,
Greater
it's fine.
Glasgow,
Just for the viewer, not everyone is necessarily going to know, so that's fine. Yeah. So Greater Glasgow and Clyde. Yeah.
they were not a good employer to work for. It's not about openness and transparency. It's about how much can be swept under the carpet, how many secrets they can hold, and it's all, in my opinion, supported by all the directors, who basically allow this to continue. And it's detrimental to patient care, but it's also detrimental to staff's mental welfare as well. And you also have to look at the duty of candour for the relatives of the patients who are suffering from what is really going on within the health board.
So honesty and openness wasn't something that was encouraged then.
No, very
No.
much. And you will realise that when I start to go into other stories. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And I believe you had some concerns about staffing levels, and the level of the various mix of which staff were doing what
Yeah.
particular tasks.
What my concern was is that staff side partnership working is the union as well as management within the local area. So we are all supposed to be working in this under this partnership agreement, which in reality is an absolute fantasy because there is no partnership agreement. It's a paper exercise that doesn't really work. We are supposed to be sitting, discussing staffing levels, how they work, presenting staff ratio patterns so that we can turn around and say, okay, the level of staff that we require on shift to manage this ward safely is X, Y, and Z. And that comes down to risk assessment, what potentially the patient needs in line with basically personal centred care. So perhaps if that patient needs special observations or something like that, and they require two staff to watch that patient, that's the way that that would work. So you have to risk assess that and put extra staff on to allow for that, so that the ward has been staffed in safe staffing levels, and that just doesn't happen. I mean, what was happening?
There's no risk assessment at all.
Well, prior to COVID, yes, there was risk assessments been done. You will see when I further go into COVID, you will see how risk assessments were simply forgotten almost in this complete Scottish Government guidance which took over. But I'll go over that at a later stage because I believe during COVID the law was ignored completely. And basically Scottish Government guidance superseded all when it should have been the other way around, and legislative law and common law should have took precedence over anything, and that simply did not happen during COVID. However,
so they abandoned the legal responsibility to fulfil the requirements of basically what was just advice.
Yes, I mean that's what you will see when I go on to speak about unlawful masks. The masks did not meet the criteria for being covered by law. They were unsafe, and yet they continually promoted unsafe masks, which I believe were a death trap. And basically led staff to their absolute illness and death. And that should not have happened. The Health and Safety at Work Act 1974 was absolutely there to protect the workers, and yet the Scottish government were basically saying that these masks were safe, and yet they weren't even deemed to be PPE by law.
I was going to say there was an epidemiologist at the COVID inquiry a few days ago. I did the report on it, and he was saying that as someone who was an expert in this and dealing with sort of viral outbreaks, and he was saying himself that the masks themselves weren't suitable; they were effectively useless. And you agree with this, but you were saying this years ago, weren't you?
Yes, I mean, the thing is, people are saying that they didn't work, they were useless. The main thing here is they were not deemed to be PPE by law, and no one is actually acknowledging that. There is law in place to protect people, and I can go into this at a later stage, and I can talk you through all the COSH regulations and stuff regarding the masks.
Yeah, we'll when we get to that, we'll certainly discuss that.
Yeah.
And so this obviously, you're saying this is dangerous for staff and patients, everyone. So effectively, nobody was really in any way protected.
No, not at all.
No.
I mean, I'll give you an example. I worked in a ward where the the staff safety levels were 4 staff on an early, 4 staff on a back shift, and 3 on a night shift. So we were finding that the back shift was going down to 3 all the time. And when I tried to challenge that, I was told, be quiet, we're not really here to listen to you. And yet I was the on-site rep. So I was then going to staff and saying to them, the internal process within the health board to basically report anything is something called a DATEX. And that is very different from the original recording that I will go on to at a later stage. But you had the DATEX system, which staff had the right to record stuff through this DATEX system.
Mm-hmm.
However, the system was fatally flawed because you would complete the DATEX and then it would go immediately to your line manager, who then could go in and change any information that he wanted to, and you did not have to approve his changes.
So he or she could overwrite what you've reported and change your words, and you were the one responsible for those words.
Yeah, they had the right.
That's crazy.
Yes, they can go in and they can also delete the form as well. So what I used to say to staff was basically take a note of everything, because you couldn't obviously photograph it because you've got GDPR and you've got the data protection act then to concern yourself about. But if you went on and you basically wrote down everything that you had written on that form alongside the reference number. But the point is, the person who actually records the form never sees it again. So you don't know what that form will look like when it reaches its final destination. So I think that.
So they're putting words in your mouth, effectively.
They can change it. It's fatally flawed, and I've said that since day one. It's fatally flawed.
Yeah, there's no continuation. There's no, what's the word? They do it like in investigations. There's no sort of line of evidence that's unbroken. This is a broken line of evidence, isn't it?
I've heard managers actually turn around and say, doesn't matter what you've put on that form, I'm going to change it anyway.
Wow.
I have heard that.
I don't doubt that. I don't doubt that. But how did this all affect you, though?
It wasn't good. I mean, we were running below numbers. I was the rep. I felt as if I was letting people down because no matter what I did, there was this toxic environment that we worked in, and staff were absolutely terrified to speak out for fear of the consequences.
A state of fear, effectively, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a culture of blame and fear, and it's a toxic culture to work in the NHS.
And when you're caring for people who they themselves are often very ill, the last thing you need, of course, is the people caring for you to be distracted, to be fearful, to be depressed. You need them to be on the ball, aware, and that isn't happening, is it?
No,
No.
no. And staff are too frightened to speak out. And you will see further down the line when I go on to speak about what happened to me as a rep. It ties in to this culture of let's support senior management who deem themselves all omnipotent and answerable to no one else but themselves. And in my opinion, you will see a government who has supported that. And basically, there's no accountability within the health service anymore. And it's just not right. And that is why people are being put at risk.
I mean, staff as well as patients, I'd imagine.
Yes.
Sort of the mental health aspect for the staff must have been pretty bad. Did that affect you? I mean, did you get mental issues, sort of depression or anything? Or?
I think we all did. I think anybody who says that they don't work for the health board and haven't had a level of mental health problems would be lying.
Yeah.
And I have actually watched a number of my members actually get to the point where they've wanted to take their lives.
As bad as that?
Yes.
Wow. That's
bad as that.
That is, and that's all just basically senior staff protecting their own backsides, isn't it? They don't want to be held accountable.
I will give you an example. Things for me, I had a work-related injury back in 2005, which was extremely bad. A patient had pulled a curtain rail down. It was a complete accident. And I had moved him and the curtain rail had fallen on me. So it was an accident. We understand accidents happen. And the curtain rail was designed to fall in case anyone tried to commit suicide. So I agreed with the fact that the curtain rail had to fall. However, it was a very old hospital. It was a curtain rail that housed 5 bed areas, which fell in my right hand. After that, I had a life of misery, absolute misery with the health service, trying to stay in a job. Now, prior to 2010, you had the 1995 Disability Discrimination Act. They didn't work in line with that at all. It was all about how they could basically get rid of me at every given opportunity. And in 2015, things became so bad that at that point I went to the local MSP and I outlined, well, 2 of us actually went to the local MSP and outlined how bad things were for us and how we were feeling. And at that point, he had Paul Gray involved, Colin Brown from NHS Scotland, and 3 directors of NHS Greater Glasgow and Clyde came down to Greenock to meet with me. I think they came down about 4 times to meet with me regarding discussing how bad the bullying was down here. How bad. And one of those people was actually Fiona McQueen, who was the chief nurse for Scotland. She came down here to meet with me 3 times. She was so concerned about the level of bullying.
And again, that wasn't addressed, I bet.
No, nobody was to blame before.
Nobody was to blame. No. They sweep it all under the carpet because if nobody talks about it, then it doesn't exist. Yes.
So that's how bad things were for me personally in 2015. And not long after that meeting, I collapsed and I took what medics thought was a massive heart attack, and it was actually stress related. When I then went back to work, I was put off again because apparently they didn't have a post for me this time. And that's the way they treated people. And by that time, the Equality Act 2010 was in place with the protected characteristics.
You'd say, a lot more protections. Yeah.
A lot more protection. You were covered by protected characteristics, and Section 20 opens up your whole thing about reasonable adjustments that they have to adhere to. They don't adhere to this. And no matter what they don't adhere to, nothing ever happens.
It's just so typical of these in power. The arrogance, I think, is that they just don't. It's not that they don't care; it's they don't even want to care. No. They're just totally ambivalent towards it, aren't they? But you sent me a thing because apparently you at this point or during the sort of the raising of issues, you were assaulted.
Yes. What had happened with this was eventually I was put on protective characteristics. My protective
Yeah.
characteristic allowed me to have reasonable adjustments in place. Now, to get to that point, they had to send down the head of GGC's occupational health to do a risk assessment on me because they were trying to drag me to a gym in Glasgow so that I could what was the word they used again? I think it was overdo my paces when I already had a disability, but never mind. They brought the head of occupational health down and reasonable adjustments were set and they had to adhere to them. Well, we kind of adhere to them. So at this point,
I was going to say, I'm just going to bring up there's a newspaper report. Just pop that on the screen there. So it's up people because I think people can see that if I bring it up. There you are, Inverclyde. And this was the report. And the whole thing's there, so it is gettable. So anyone at home watching this, you can get this. It's let me just pull that up slightly better there. Actually, it's in the Daily Record, and it's the 17th of March. Oh, Paddy's Day, 2022. So it's there, and I will put a link in at the bottom. I'll pin a comment with the links to everything I show. I'll pin the links so you can go in yourself and see the story. But anyway, yeah, sorry, please, Leslie, carry on.
what had happened that morning was we had a patient who was a lovely patient, an absolute lovely patient, but she wasn't being medicated properly. She was mentally unwell. And we had been continually raising this with the consultant, come over, review her medication, please do, she's very unwell. He continually procrastinated over coming over to adjust her medication, and the patient was getting more and more unwell. And a number of us were assaulted. And I went to help my colleagues. Now, I shouldn't have been working with this patient because of the reasonable adjustments. However, I went in to assist them. I was at the bottom of the bed, simply helping, and she lunged at me and pulled a clump of my hair out. So I decided really at this point, enough is enough.
Yeah, and it wasn't just you, was there? There was a lot of them.
No, they were getting slapped, and again, the usual. We don't want you filling in a DTEX. They're very. They do not like when a member of staff fills in a DTEX. However, they can change it anyway. So, they basically do not really like staff filling out any form, which showcases that they're running understaff or consultants are not doing their job or whatever.
Yeah. So again, I'm just at this moment, I'm just putting up another one, another sort of link to show the news that has happened on that. So it's it's another item that's there. So I shall bring that down and come back up. Again, I'll put the links up. So yeah, so there was quite a few attacks then, over the time. It's a hard enough. I'm going to say it's a hard enough working environment when you're getting attacked by patients, and then no support from anyone, senior management or even middle management, I'd imagine.
I would completely agree with that. I mean, it's not the first time I have heard a manager say, "We don't want to see a DTEX. Do not put in an accident form." And I would be saying to the members, as the rep, I want you to put in a
definitely put them in. Yeah.
But you had the environment of they were so terrified of what would happen when they did. They didn't put in a lot of DTEXs, and that is a main problem. But then they can be deleted anyway.
So no, that's it. Yeah. So a lot of people probably didn't bother because they said even if they did, it wouldn't make any difference at all.
But that's the kind of toxic environment you are working in. And I even saw one of my colleagues, well, not one of my direct colleagues, but one in another unit, she had her head bitten. Another colleague was so badly assaulted that he had a broken shoulder. So, I mean, it's serious attacks.
They break a shoulder.
They broke his shoulder, dislocated it. So I'm not sure if that's dislocated his shoulder, so he was off for a
Yeah.
considerable
Oh
length of
God, no,
time.
that's pain. I've dislocated a finger before, and I thought I was going to die. It was awful. Um, yeah. So, what was done? Was anything done by management?
Oh,
Nothing at all.
not
No.
really, no. No, not
Now,
really.
was this part of why it was put into special measures?
No, it was put into special measures because of what was going on in the Queen Elizabeth University Hospital regarding contaminated water, the deaths of children, pigeon droppings, all those stories regarding the death of, for instance, Millie Main, whose
Mhm.
mum was Kimberly Darroch, who's spoken out, other children who died, Sophia Smith, who came from Greenock. There was other children as well, Leila Green. There was a number of children who had all died basically either through infection or, I mean, these were kids who had cancer to start with and
Yeah.
ended up with infections because of various various issues that were happening
Yeah.
throughout that hospital.
I presume, obviously, every hospital is going to have people dying, of course, but it was just statistically higher, wasn't it?
Yes. I
Yes.
mean, you had systems that weren't working. You had water that was said to be contaminated. Um, you're questioning of a hospital. I mean, I don't think a hospital should ever have opened if the wrong, whatever they came to, whatever conclusion they came to basically think that that was adequate pipes or whatever was
Hmm.
used that seemed to cause this infection. I don't know. I'm not qualified to speak about
No,
anything like that.
but
All I can speak about is what I've read and the
yeah,
evidence.
I mean, one of the things I read was that the aspergillus problem, this mold,
Yes,
um, which is apparently rampant within the Queen Elizabeth. Um, but the contractors who were actually building it said at the time that there was this problem as they were building it, and they
yes,
wanted to know what to do.
yes.
And basically, the health I can't remember who the health minister was at the point where that first came in. To be
It
fair,
was
it
Jane
wasn't
Freeman.
Hamza Youssef at that point. But they were basically, oh, we don't know. And it was like, well, if you give us the money, we can clear it up, we can get the treatment in. And nobody gave them the money and just basically told them to carry on building. So they built this entire hospital with this fungus rampant throughout it before it even opened. That hospital was an infection risk.
Well, one of the one of the gentlemen who helped fit the pipes is willing to speak to you at a later date, so I'm sure he could fill you in more about that. I know who it was.
Right, I just had a message coming up saying time limit on this one. We may have to do this in two parts.
That's all right.
So we're going to end this one here. We're going to move into the second part. It's just that the time limit was up on that Zoom call, and I didn't want it cutting out, in the middle of something else. So we're going to drop this one here, but then we're going to pick it up in part 2 of the same interview, which will be right after this one. So do please shift along and see the next one. On the tail end of this, I will put there will be the links, underneath underneath for all the newspapers and whatever. So I'll put the links down as a pinned comment on this one. But now you can go across to see part 2 of the interview. Thank you.